This is your World War III update, and that is the Doomsday Radio that you are hearing right now, delivering 8 nuclear emergency messages yesterday. We have a lot to talk about today, my friends, so let's just get right to it. First, I'm going to give you the overview, then we're going to do the deep dive. Russia's response to yesterday's historic attack is likely imminent, as evidenced in the facial expressions of Vladimir Putin, who appears to be absolutely livid. The UK is amassing nuclear weapons that they should have in their possession long after the world has ended in 2035. Germany is also going to be committing to mobilizing hundreds of thousands of troops. The EU is also mobilizing for war in general. Trump has threatened Iran, saying no enrichment. Talk about contradictory statements. Trump just issued one of the most unequivocal statements with respect to uranium enrichment. No enrichment, which means they're going to war, guys. There's no doubt about it. Iran is currently doing an exercise that is simulating a strike on the Israeli Dimona nuclear power plant. The Ukrainian talks with Russia in Istanbul have been a complete disaster and have totally fallen on their face. What more can you expect when you have the CIA blowing up nuclear bombers in Russia? That, of course, prompted a call from Sergei Lavrov to Marco Rubio. You know, we're always straddling very close to that line when the SecDefs have to call one another. Canada is currently burning down. Gold and silver skyrocketed today. Gold approaching an all-time high once again. What a big surprise, haha. AI is about to get scary, according to Sam Altman. Now, let's take these stories apart one by one. The strategic brinkmanship is intensifying. Many of you know by now, this guy's probably going to the gulag. He recorded some footage of Russian air bases burning with several bombers on fire. As you can see, there is no denying it. Russia got smacked. Now, the actual quantity of planes that were destroyed or incapacitated or just partly damaged varies from 6 to 40. The most credible information that I've seen is about between 12 and 17, which seems reasonable, okay? So what we are going to see next, nobody knows. The consummate statecraft of the Russians and how they conduct themselves in these types of situations always fails to impress those of us who would be quick to respond with some sort of immediate reprisal and retaliation. Of course, the manner in which Russia conducts their affairs is much, much different. And thankfully, despite the Doomsday Radio station blaring out 8 times yesterday, in light of what I presume was signaling some sort of attack on their nuclear planes, which is likely what prompted the call from Lavrov to Rubio. You got to understand how close we actually are, guys, okay? So it's on days like these that there is no doubt in my mind that what I am doing with the commitment of my life's work to make people aware of preparedness and just the conviction that I have now, knowing that my prediction all along, despite all of the naysayers and the hatred that I've been getting for my position, not of Trump derangement, not at all. In fact, people with Trump derangement, true Trump derangement, I abhor those people because I find them to be, equally dangerous. And one of my feared scenarios is what's going to happen when the pendulum swings the other way. Now that Trump and Elon Musk have overplayed their hand, the left is going to come back with a vengeance. And you ain't seen nothing yet when it comes to authoritarian crackdowns on personal liberties. It's coming and it's going to be bad. Now, what I do know is that this situation is about to spiral out of control. There are few off-ramps that remain at this point in time. And both sides are obstinate and maximalist in their demands. There is no movement on the goalpost in terms of either side's demands. And now that the Ukrainians have been emboldened by this victory, some Russians are calling it a Pyrrhic victory. This is not a Pyrrhic victory, okay? And this is not a nothing burger either. We are talking about, when you all told, taken into consideration the amount of bombers that have already been destroyed by the Ukrainians since the start of this war, and you know that the Russians are limited in their ability to rebuild them because of all the sanctions on the supply chain. Sure, they could probably get stuff from China, but they're not really building a lot of new aircrafts that are airworthy. You know that this is having a deleterious effect on their ability to project conventional power and nuclear power. Now, fortunately, this leg of Russia's nuclear triad is pretty much negligible. When it comes to full-blown nuclear war, a lot of those Russian bombers are going to get shot out of the sky if they attempt to float them over, the Pacific Ocean or the Arctic Ocean or into Europe. They're going to be shot down. Russia's ace in the hole is essentially their ability to project using their ICBMs and their submarine technology. Yeah, they got hypersonic missiles that can be launched from air platforms in tactical, yielding tactical nuclear explosions, but that's not really the important aspect of their nuclear triad. It's maybe all told 10% of their nuclear triad. So that's one, benefit in the sense of targeting that, because it's somewhat redundant anyways. Now, one thing I want people to understand is that this Operation Spiderweb was being planned for 18 months. Think about that for a second. 18 months. Nothing says continuity of government more than an operation which we know was being initiated by the CIA, because even the New York Times has admitted that the CIA has been in there assisting Ukrainian saboteurs with these attacks on Russian critical infrastructure and military installations. So imagine all of the things that have happened in the last 18 months, okay? Getting thrown out of the Oval Office, the fact that there has been 2 presidents now, the failed offensive, all of the red lines that have been crossed, all of the drones that have made it their way into Moscow, the performative peace talks, the delivery of advanced weapons. And all this time, they have been holding on to this wild card this 0 day, I should say, and they decided to burn it yesterday. The question is why? Why did they decide to burn it yesterday? Now, I don't necessarily have the answer, but what we do know is that this is a continuity of an American foreign policy which hasn't changed at all under Trump. In fact, it's gotten monumentally worse. The scale of these drone attacks has gotten way worse than it ever was under Biden. The long-range strikes into Russia have been far worse under Trump. And this is not like, oh, Trump bad, Biden good, the farthest thing. Look, when I talk about the U.S. administration as it comes to foreign policy, I view it unilaterally, because it is. There is very little difference of opinion in the upper echelons. Now, in order to appease their voting base, politicians will say certain things, as Trump did. Today he released a picture of himself, and I find it surprising that he said he was going to end the war in 24 hours, and here we are. He's releasing pictures of himself 6 months later, and nothing has changed. In fact, the situation has got monumentally worse. Russia is literally having its bombers, its nuke bombers, just days after Donald Trump said that you are playing with fire. I mean, we really need to understand, Trump is the World War III president, okay? I've told you guys it's all gonna crash on Trump's watch. And I'm not in this personality cult, okay? Because I understand that there's a big club, me and you are not in it. Now, you can put those people on a pedestal, you can idolize Trump, and if that brings you motivation in the morning to get out there and be a better person, fine. It's just like religion, in my opinion. If it helps you be a better person and you're contributing to society in a more constructive way, that's great. But don't try and tell me that the situation is improving when it comes to how serious the escalation and the culmination of hostilities has become, because it's not getting better at all. And that is obvious to anybody. Now, I see a lot of people twiddling their thumbs, looking the other way, because again, I get it. I voted for Pierre Poilievre because I wanted to get my guns back. And it really didn't matter what the other policies were, because at the end of the day, that's the fundamental base freedom. And so I get that you kind of have to turn the blind eye, but don't pretend that the situation is getting better, okay? Russia has one real ultimate solution to this problem, and it's a nuclear one. Now, let's hope that they don't ever have to resort to that. But judging by the look on Vladimir Putin's face, this woman is talking to him about orphanages and foster parents or something to that effect. And, you can see the utter perturbation. He's very perturbed when the camera pans over to him. Look at him, he's so stressed out. Talk about just the stress that is countenanced in his face is very evident. But she's talking to him about, underwater basket weaving or something like that. And he's thinking about nuclear Armageddon. Here he is again. So this is the only footage we have of Russian President Vladimir Putin interacting with anybody today. And the Kremlin has been surprisingly silent about all of this. So she's giving him this pitch about foster care, and he's just like, it's like when your wife is telling you about, the girl at work who she hates, and you're just like, okay, yeah, whatever, I got shit to do. That's that's the vibe that I'm getting from Putin. Look at him, he's looking at, you just look at the clock. Look at this. You can tell, look at him. You looked at the clock. He's like, come on, man. We're in the middle of a frickin' war here. Anyways, yeah, so who knows what? I think it's got to be a Reznik. It's got to be something, because we know this is a continuity of agenda. And if the Russians do nothing, then NATO is going to just keep pushing further and further. And you can't look at this situation in isolation, okay? This situation is culminating. Every other day, there is another attack on Russia's capability to project its strategic power around the world. And that puts them at a disadvantage if it ever did come to day X, which we're inexorably hurtling towards. And so what Vladimir Putin needs to balance, he eventually is going to have to play that card. He is eventually going to have to make a statement. There's people saying, well, as long as they continue the slow grind, and yeah, there's going to be a big offensive this summer. Ukraine is talking about it. The Russians are amassing forces. It's likely going to be to create a buffer zone in those three regions or somewhere on the map. I don't know. I'm not an expert when it comes to the minutia with respect to the operations that are currently ongoing or planned, but it does take its toll. I mean, okay, so we accept that Russia has just lost a significant portion of their bombers that they use to fly these sorties. Okay, so they got their submarines left. Well, have they lost any submarines? Yes. Have they lost a lot of their naval fighting power in the Black Sea? Yes. Okay, so eventually there has to reach a point where you say the line gets drawn, where regardless of whether this slow grind offensive is happening on the front line, at what cost, and is that imperiling their capability to respond strategically to a much greater threat posed by NATO, who is surrounding them everywhere. I mean, completely surrounded, flying hundreds, if not thousands of drones this past month. I don't know how many drones, it was in the thousands, that made their way into Moscow, some of them very deep, probing Russia's airspace, trying to understand the setup for a decapitation strike could not be more obvious than it is. And if they have these types of asymmetrical sleeper cells at their disposal in the country that they can activate whenever, you can bet that there's a lot more than just this one that has occurred. Sabotage behind enemy lines from the Russian point of view has been a problem ever since the beginning of this conflict. But that the current operation was so elaborate and sophisticated, it tells us that there likely are many more of these types of cells that are sleeping inside Russia, awaiting, latent, and awaiting to be given their orders. And for people who believe that Trump didn't know about this, now, look, the way the CIA conducts these operations, there's always, it's like a game of telephone. There's plausible deniability. A guy pays a guy who pays a guy who pays a guy. That way, maybe Trump is oblivious to the operation. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't top down. And if Trump was against the attack on the Russian nuclear triad, then they would come out and denounce it as a unnecessary escalation in hostilities. They would have came out immediately and did that. The fact that they didn't, they haven't cut funding, they haven't cut weapons. And, so we know that they're in support of this. Their tacit approval by the lack of condemnation. So that is the real problem here. It's not even, sure, I mean, they make it so that the POTUS doesn't know what the CIA mercs on the ground are doing, right? That's how it's always been waged. But that doesn't mean that, their tacit approval of it can be overlooked. Because if Trump was really serious about de-escalation, then he would officially come out and say, but he's not, okay? Because they know what time it is. I mean, he's talking about, take a look at this. Let me see if I have the slide here. I mean, some of the things that this guy's been saying today is one of those days where, I'm way too right for my own good. It's kind of going to my head. Okay, not only, the Iranian enrichment thing, I mean, that's a foregone conclusion now. It's a fait accompli. We're going to war. Just had a great talk with our military leaders. Remember, not the war president, right? It is the strongest, that's right, strength through, what is it? What is the terminology? I can't remember the saying. Strength through, I forget what it is. Something to do with, having a strong military is the best defense or whatever. You know what I'm talking about. It is the strongest military we ever had, including the fact that we are stockpiling weapons at a rate never before seen by our country. Really? Even since World War II? That's a bold statement. Either way, it's probably not a good thing. But, guns are a part of American culture, and that I can appreciate. But don't say that you're not the World War III president, because you clearly are, right? So, that's not looking good. Now, as indicated, the Russian doomsday radio squawking UVB-76. The buzzer broadcasts 8 encrypted nuclear command messages, a volume unprecedented outside the strategic readiness drills, okay? So this was very significant, as could be expected considering these are Russia's strategic planes that were targeted. Signals follow the same cryptographic structure that's been observed in the past high alert or readiness drills. Historically, this format corresponds to nuclear command readiness checks, mobilization alerts, or strategic force signaling. Recall that this same type of message, not this exact one, this is what went out before the war started. We're going to hear this in about a few weeks' time when Russia starts their big offensive. They only have so long before the rainy season potentially bogs them down in a muddy morass in the fall, so they have to get to it quickly if they're going to get to it at all. The U.S. officials involved in this matter are saying that you can expect a disproportionate retaliation from the Russians. Now, the Karaganov doctrine, Sergei Karaganov, who's a political analyst inside Russia and a military analyst, he has been appealing for Russia and Vladimir Putin to utilize nuclear weapons in a small dose, so to prevent a large-scale nuclear war. His philosophy is that if we don't do something demonstrable now to show our power, the West is going to continue to push the boundaries to the point where we're only going to have one option, and that's engage in a full-blown nuclear war. It's very similar to the escalate to de-escalate theory of nuclear warfare, by which you utilize a nuclear weapon kind of in a small dose, so you don't have to, so that it acts as a deterrent and it shows that you mean business. Now, will the Orezhnik at this point in time, of course, remember, they used it right, I think it was after, or was it in the run? I think it was after Trump got elected, they actually used the Orezhnik. And that was interesting timing as well, because I told you at the time, the reason why they did that is because, it was a message that they understand that the Trump deception isn't what it appears to be, and they knew full well that he wasn't going to end the war. Putin has said as much in interviews, that the president lacks the ability to make any fundamental changes to foreign policy because the CIA self-guiding autonomous agents are out there, enacting these policies that were laid down years and years ago that are out of the control of the POTUS. So, even if they wanted to probably call back the troops and say, hey, let's lay off burning these 0 days, they probably couldn't. Keith Kellogg has said that the U.S. is in a proxy war with Russia. And remember, this is a day, this is obvious to anybody, but to hear a U.S. official say it is something else. So here's what he had to say, okay? This is the envoy to Ukraine and the United States.
The fact that Chancellor Merz has said, well, I'm going to give the Ukrainians the Taurus missile system. Well, that's like a Tomahawk land attack missile in miniature form. It's got a significant warhead to it. It travels, roughly 300 miles, which means you can penetrate deep into Russian space. Putin has made those comments. Well, if you're going to supply them with weapons, we continue to be part of the aggressor. And he considers this a proxy war by NATO as well right now. And frankly, in a way it is. You look at what the European...
Mask off. With mask off. What's Future say? Mask off. It's mask off time. The masks are about to come off. You better be prepared. I put my money where my mouth is, man. I moved my family off the grid for a reason. The Istanbul talks collapsed in 1 hour. 1 hour. There was delegations that were fairly sizable, and they said their piece, and I'm not even going to get into the details of the negotiations because it's the same old shit. We want you to get out of the territories, and then maybe we'll do the ceasefire. You can't arm. We got to denazify, blah, 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 blah. Same old shit we've heard 1,000 times before. Nothing's going to change until a nuclear bomb is dropped. Mark my words. And I've been right up until this point, so, be incredulous to your own peril when it comes to listening to the preppers. See, the preppers, not all of us are the sharpest knives in the drawer when it comes to intellectual geopolitical matters, but what I will say is that there's a wisdom, right? It's like a dog knows when I'm not saying preppers are dogs. It's like, the animals, they know when a storm's coming. They don't have they can't write an IQ test. They just know. This is why there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. I hope I'm trying to bring you guys a blend of the two to get you apprised of what's about to go down. Because this was written in the stars, man. It's written in all that stuff that they're building is going to get used someday. Let's just hope they get decommissioned and used for nuclear power as opposed to blowing each other up. But no, we're probably going to blow each other up. Ukraine is trying to exhaust Russia's air defenses in preparation for Day X. So all of these drones are, the Russia bros will be like, well, it doesn't matter because we're still advancing on the front line. at a, at a slow crawl. Sure, you are, but at what expense? And so if you can exhaust Russia's air defense with these thousands of drones, then you put Russia in a very vulnerable position, because what's happening here is they are, if you go and fight in, my son fights and my daughter fight in jiu-jitsu, and some days you got to fight like 5 matches in a row, right? And then, there'll be this guy at the end who, because of his rank, he's a high rank, he doesn't have to fight all the underlings. And so he's fresh by the time the other guys who have to work their way up, he's fighting for gold automatically. And I'm not sure if I'm explaining this well, but, if you're lower on the tier, then you have to, fight a few matches to see who fights for gold. So you're exhausted by the time you go up against this guy. Even if that guy sucks, like Europe and their heterogeneous military structure, which is NATO, I should say, which is not entirely harmonized, different languages, different cultures, different calibers of, there's NATO standard, but you know what I'm saying? So the Russians, even if NATO is weak conventionally and they don't have the experience, you have Russia going at it with Ukraine for years and years. They're beat up. They're exhausted. Then Europe comes in fresh. Once all of Russian air defense has been depleted, trying to take out and manage this Ukrainian drone situation, which is only increasing because this is what the West is funding. Who do you think is building all these drones? It's not the Ukrainians that are building all these. Where are they getting the supplies and all this stuff? It's the West who's doing all this. It's the West who's, doing the satellites. So get it out of your mind. They're already not a NATO proxy. They're de facto NATO member. In fact, they were just invited to the NATO conference in The Hague. So, this is exactly what is happening here. They're exhausting them so that when it ultimately comes time to do the man dance between East and West, the Russians will be so heavily attrited and weakened that they'll be able to do a decapitation strike whilst incurring minimal damage themselves. That's what the plan is, guys. Russian roadways are currently clogged with panicked citizens as military checkpoints and internal controls escalate. So they think there's more that is about to happen. And I guess, if anything, we got to give the West their praises, whether it was the Israelis with the pager attack thing or these asymmetrical style attacks. We always think that the West is thinking one-dimensionally. But the more I look at this, we always, yes, you have that consummate statecraft of the Russian government in terms of how they conduct themselves diplomatically. And it's impeccable. Like, it's always professional down to the minute. Like it was, like they're just adhering to all the rules, right? And they do that in such a stoic fashion that despite any provocations that are thrown their way, they just say, no, we have a directive and we're sticking to that regardless. So they're strategic in the sense in that they don't waver and they're not swayed by these temperamental tantrums thrown by NATO. However, we have to give props to the Ukrainians for the asymmetrical nature of these attacks. I mean, they are thinking outside the box at every turn, whereas Russia's strategy seemingly is just grind away. And there's no real imaginative aspect to it whatsoever. You know what I'm saying? So we have to give, and this, I did a whole video that barely got any views, surprisingly. I laid out the 30 different types of asymmetrical warfare, from blowing up dams to, intercepting various waterways, closing down waterways, doing cyber attacks, the list goes on and on and on. And the people who are leveraging that right now are the Israelis and the Ukrainians. It's not the Russians who are really doing these masterful attacks that have a low investment and that have a high return on that investment. Like those drones that the Ukrainians use, they cost like $400, okay? And they were taking out planes worth tens of millions of dollars. So I'm not saying they're going to be able to do that all the time, but I would not be surprised if they burn that 0 day, there's a reason. It's because something big is about to go down. It's also perhaps a sign that they have something else planned that is going to be even different than that. And they're going to continue to try to blindside and continue to be a moving target. That's the goal when Russia is facing all of NATO, which they are. You'll notice that Germany will stick its neck out and say, we're going to send this. And the Russians' attention is focused on Germany. Okay, now, well, they're focused on Germany and the Taurus missiles. Suddenly it's the UK and they want F-35s with nuclear weapons, and they're building 12 nuclear submarines, and they're going to mobilize their forces, and they're going to put troops in Ukraine. And then the French are like, hey, we're going to do that too. Then Trump starts talking about how Putin's gone crazy and he better be careful because he's playing with fire, and we're going to, green light this raw earth mineral deal, which essentially is going to facilitate lend-lease to the Ukrainians and give them a blank check for weapons into perpetuity. And so it's just constantly moving. And so Russia's only hope at this point in time, their only hope is that unless there's some grand conspiracy, okay, and Putin's in on it, and this is some weird thing that the West is like training itself to get prepared to fight the Chinese. That's an idea I thought about, but very low likelihood. Very, forget that I even said that. Unless that happens, Russia's finished. They're going to be destroyed. They have one chance at this point in time, and that is to do a demonstrable nuclear strike or use the Orezhniks and use them in such a way that is so impactful, that shows how serious they are. Because the strategic forbearance that they've exhibited up to this point, they've already earned the moral high ground, maybe not from the West, but in the minds of the global South. The Russians already have their vote. They've already demonstrated a certain level of restraint despite all this. They have every green light and license right now to pull the trigger, and nobody in the world can act surprised. Now, I'm not saying that the West is going to be pearl clutching and they're going to be using that to vilify the Russians. Oh, now we got to really mobilize. Now we got to send $1,000 billion trillion to Ukraine, right? Okay. Maybe that happens. Or maybe people smarten the fuck up. I mean, because really that's all we respond to is force. If anything, if you look at the escalate to de-escalate, that's what stopped World War II. World War II stopped because, well, according to the Americans anyways, the rationale was if we use a nuke, then we don't have to go island to island. And potentially, I'm just looking at my audio here to make sure my audio is right. Then we don't have to go island to island. I think my audio is fucked. Oh shit. Check, 1, 2. What's going on here? Is my audio screwed or is it screwed? There we go. Oh shit, I think my audio is screwed. Sorry guys. We don't have to go island to island and suffer way more casualties than we would if we drop this nuke. Yes, it's going to be a lot of civilian casualties, but in the end, it's going to save us millions of lives lost. If Russia takes that philosophy right now, then perhaps we can nip this thing in the bud before it spirals out of control. Because the last thing you want is a Russia that descends into chaos, especially if you have some drunken general at the helm and Putin's taken out, or whoever's next in command, the incorrigible Dmitry Medvedev, who's just been itching with his finger hovering over the nuclear button for a long time now. I would much rather have him continuing to write his soliloquies on Twitter than pushing nuclear buttons. But that's where we're moving towards. Russia has moved its 10 T-22M3 strategic bombers to the Far East after Ukraine drone strikes crippled up to 34% of Russia's strategic cruise missile fleet. Again, these numbers vary. It doesn't matter. Even if they just took out one nuclear bomber, Russia has to make a statement. Apparently, they lost their last A-50 AWACS plane as well, which allows the Russians to do more precise strikes deeper inside Ukraine and, of course, surveil the activities of NATO as well, what they're doing on the borders, which is increasingly, everything is projection. So if NATO says Russia is amassing on the Finnish border, that means NATO is amassing on the Finnish border, which they are, right? Russian losses may be unrecoverable, with many airframes decades old, sanctions stifling repairs and replacements years away. Now, according to Ukraine, they hit 41 Russian aircraft, including Tu-95s, Tu-160s, and an A-50, as confirmed by the SBU's chief. Well, that's worth about as much as it's written on. However, I think the most credible analysis I've heard is somewhere between 14 to 17 have been damaged or destroyed, which is massive. I mean, when you're fighting a long war of attrition like that, this could be existential for the Russians' capability to go on the offensive. They're calling it Russia's Pearl Harbor moment. Well, it's only a Pearl Harbor moment if they play it up like that in the media, if they use it as a rallying cry for mobilization. If anything, this event overshadowed the two attacks on civilian infrastructure and the attacks on the railway and the trains and the bridges that killed, several civilians. This actually overshadowed that. Now, let's change pace here. Let's see, what do we got here? It's more imagery. This is Mark Rutte saying that he's inviting that, Ukraine will be in NATO someday.
Ukraine to come into NATO.
Irreversible path to NATO, blah, blah, same old bullshit. The spy war, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. These are, okay, so this is an issue I have to address. Because again, people are saying, well, the New START treaty obligates the Russians to have their bombers out in the open so that the U.S. can see them, so they know that they're not getting ready to conduct a first nuclear strike. These are Chinese hangars, which are not bound to the same treaty, number one. But again, this leg of the Russian nuclear triad, by and large, is negligible. It's not negligible, however, from the perspective of the U.S. And this is the rub. Okay, I just thought about this. The U.S. isn't worried about Russian bombers being visible by satellites because they know they can shoot those down probably relatively easy. However, the Russians have to worry about American bombers being on display because that is part of the treaty. Where are the B-2 bombers? Okay, Diego Garcia, why are they right out there in the open? Well, it's because of that treaty, which is, for the most part, not being honored as far as we can tell. You have this proxy war being waged against, there's no inspectors in there anymore. That was part of it. So a lot of aspects of that treaty are not being obligated or honored. But yeah, so this is an interesting disadvantage that both have because the Chinese are not part of this at all. So, the Chinese are ready for this, right? They're ready for this type of drone warfare and these asymmetrical attacks. Just an interesting point. So these are trucks that are backed up as a result of increased scrutiny by, I presume, Russian security forces and police and military. So they're inspecting everything, right? So Ukraine just burned a 0 day. So it was probably as good as it was going to get. This is the Orezhnik, which we can likely anticipate very soon. Conventional or nuclear payload. Again, the problem with the Orezhnik is that they have to notify the U.S. before they fire the thing. Otherwise, the U.S. could interpret it as an attack on them or on Brussels. So, it really takes out the element of surprise. And if they don't, then they run the risk of a nuclear exchange. Now, I'm pretty sure the Americans and Trump would not push the nuclear button over something like this. They would know what it was. But it's just one of those things, right? Ukrainian F-16s to be connected to NATO's military Wi-Fi. Oh, man, all you can do is laugh at times like these. Yeah. I talked about that yesterday. Okay, so here's the deal. Here's where we're at with Ukrainian enrichment. Today, oil shot up, gold shot up, silver shot up. Markets were flat, if not down. The dollar DXY was down a little bit, but not enough to justify the move upwards. So, you know what they say, gold is for war. And despite OPEC, that's Saudi Arabia, Russia, all the oil producing, what do you call them? I just call it, it's a racket, it is what it is. The oil cartel. Despite their agreeing, Russia wasn't in an agreement, by the way, but they had to do it anyways. Despite them agreeing to increase output for oil, oil still went up in price. Now, when OPEC agrees to produce and put more oil onto the market, typically that is going to lower the price. But today, the complete opposite was true. Now, some people are saying it's because the projected, what they expected OPEC to raise their output wasn't achieved. But to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That would assume that all of that was already priced in. What makes more sense to me is that the war drums for Ukraine are beating, and they wanted to keep that price of oil as low as possible without completely destroying the U.S. oil producer in the run-up to a war with Iran, because they know that the price is going to spike. So if you can kind of get ahead of the problem by crashing oil prices beforehand, then of course that gives you a bit more runway, economic runway, for what's coming. And this may actually lead to the decoupling of the petrodollar, because if the United States finds itself in a position of crazy hyperinflation, where oil hits like $300 a barrel because nothing's getting out of the Strait of Hormuz, then the US will have to make a decision. Do we want to subsidize our own oil companies to an extent which is going to mess with the viability of the petrodollar? Now, I'm no economist, but if you're pricing oil globally and it's pegged to the dollar, then if you start, undercutting in your own market, that basically you can't have your cake and eat it too. So this war could be what separates the US, and there's no more petrodollar, which kind of would make sense when you think of all the things that are on the horizon, right? AI and, nuclear energy, possibly fusion, if we can get through this great filter. Anyways, Donald Trump came out today and just, Axios was saying, oh yeah, we don't expect there to be, the Trump proposal that was taken by Witkoff to the Iranians did not include in it a demand which demanded that the Iranians reduce their enrichment altogether, okay? That there was some permittance for enough enrichment in order to obviously run a nuclear power facility, which you need 3.67%, and for medical purposes, you need slightly higher. But Trump came out afterwards and said, we shall not allow any enrichment of uranium, in bold letters. Now, I'm not sure if he doesn't understand the science of it, if he's ill-informed, the fact that he didn't know that the president of Russia almost got assassinated the other day, perhaps he isn't well-informed, but he certainly seems to be gung-ho about stockpiling weapons at a rate never before seen by our country, and as far as I know, the weapons continue to flow to Israel unabated. So we can surmise from that they're going to war. The recon planes fly basically a never-ending reconnaissance sortie in the, the Persian Gulf, it seems, as of late. Numerous planes doing that outside of, just off the coast of Iran. So it's almost as if, and you know they're relaying that information. This idea, guys, that I'm getting so sick and tired of this phony baloney lovers quarrel between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump. It's Hollywood, it's Academy Award winning stuff. It's not true, okay? If that was true, then all Trump would have to say with both of these guys is that we're not going to come to your aid if Iran attacks. End of story. Problem solved. That he won't do that tells you everything you need to know. Basically, Iran has rejected this proposal. It should go without saying. And they call it a complete one-sided violation of their sovereignty. They say it's a non-starter. And all these people, circulating this shit on Twitter, like, man, first of all, if it comes from Axios, it's very questionable. Sometimes they give you kind of the inside scoop about what's coming next, but more often than not, when they say an unnamed US official leaks such and such information from Trump's conversation, that's propaganda. Okay, that's to shape the narrative and public opinion and test public sentiment about a particular issue. So when they came out today and they were like, yeah, we're going to allow Iran to have a certain level of enrichment. Well, we already knew that Iran rejected the proposal. So clearly that was bullshit. And then Trump comes out afterwards and boisterously blathers in his typical fashion and tells the truth, which is what we like about him. He at least tells the truth, insofar as it's the truth he knows. But, yeah. So, out of touch with reality, there is no deal. Iran is simulating military drills on the Israeli Dimona nuclear facility. This was conducted during the exercise Great Prophet 17. So there is a nuke inside Dimona, or inside Israel, even if Iran doesn't have its own nuclear weapons, and it's called the Dimona nuclear facility. Now, it's always important to remember that Iran has demonstrated the capability to bypass all of Israel's air defense, even the THAAD, which was defeated by one Houthi missile, okay? So imagine, and I don't even think they have that many THAAD interceptors. So if you suspect that the Iranians might have a nuclear weapon, then you have to presume that they obviously have the delivery system for it. They claim they have the ability to, or many Iranian scientists have commented that they have the ability to miniaturize the technology. And so you must presume then that they have the ability to put it on a missile and send it, and that missile can bypass your defense, and then Israel is done. Tel Aviv is gone. So if you commit to destroying Iran, then it's going to be mutually assured destruction scenario, at least on a regional level. Both Israel and Iran will be destroyed. So if they're going to attack Iran, it's got to be a decapitation strike. And that's kind of what I fear, is that they're only going to have one shot at this, right? So they can't just attack Iran half-heartedly and then potentially have Iran respond in a way which could be existential for Israel. Now, I don't think that Iran, who will receive the counsel of the Russians and the Chinese, will be that drastic in that they're going to completely, escalate to the point of using a nuke against Israel. But if you're talking about Israel blowing up their nuclear facilities, which is in of itself a radiological event, I know our nuclear physicists will say that it's not. It is in the sense that I guess like depleted uranium might be a nuclear incident. Like it's radiological, but it's not an acute crisis per se in the same magnitude that it would be. But we don't know exactly what level of enrichment of uranium they have also. If it's 60%, then maybe it is a bit more disastrous, even if it is entombed in 500 meters of granite. We know that if that would happen here, it would be, Karen would be inside with her gas mask on for years, for the rest of her life. if she lived in proximity to the epicenter of such a disaster. So what I'm saying is the war with Iran is undoubtedly heading our way. No deal is possible without permanent, verifiable sanctions relief. We will not choose between surrender or war, they claim. Now, before I move on to the financial stuff, the AI stuff, and the fire smoke stuff, right now in Canada, I mean, we're seeing the biggest fire, I think, in our province history. And I'm going to show you the maps in just a moment. You're going to be getting a taste of that smoke if you haven't already down south. UK and Germany are preparing for war. Keir Starmer announced today that they're going to be shifting to a continuous war preparedness mode, invoking Cold War comparisons in the process. Nuclear war submarines. The UK will build 12 Dreadnought-class nuclear-powered submarines and invest $15 billion in warheads. But they say, don't worry, we're not going to put nukes on them. Yeah, they're going to build nuclear submarines and invest $15 billion in warheads. But don't worry, they're not going to put the two together because they say so. Now, by the time this comes around, I think we'll already be in Mad Max anyways. So, because they're saying 2035. And the way these guys work, it'd probably be a lot longer, barring some major catalyst that would trigger, rapid hyper prioritization of military mobilization. Like we're talking about a 10% GDP commitment. I can't remember what it was in World War II, but it was quite a bit. Now it's 3%, they're saying. They want to get F-35s armed with nuclear weapons. They're going to be getting the B-61-12 nuclear bombs that I believe are already in Europe, not the new ones, but the U.S. has 100 tactical nukes inside Europe as it stands. And remember, there's no more treaties anymore, with the exception of New START, which is pretty much not being adhered to anyways. And what else? Yeah, they're transforming into a battle-ready, armor-clad nation. And mark my words, they're going to give immigrants, they're going to dangle the carrot of citizenship if they join the military. The German Bundeswehr chief is warning NATO needs to be ready tonight. They claim continuity of government only. The Bundeswehr general warns NATO must be ready to fight Russia tonight, even though he thinks it's not going to start till 2029, but he says we should be ready tonight. Now, on this topic, they're talking about expanding the Bundeswehr to, I think, 200,000 troops. What the hell are you going to do with 200,000 troops? My theory on all this military mobilization in Europe, I've talked about this theory before, but if you're going into what you know is ultimately going to be a nuclear war, what are you having a conventional army for? The only thing you're doing is policing your population after the radioactive dust settles. Okay, so that's what I fear is happening here. Because if they're talking about building a formidable army that's going to be able to fight the Russians, now, presuming that you don't have that force multiplier of automation, robotics, drones, in that one guy is potentially 10 guys, okay, so maybe you only need 200,000. You don't need 5 million guys like, Germany had in World War II, or 7 million or 10 million like the Russians had in World War II. Maybe you don't need that many troops because you have more drones. But I still think if you're going to be, presumably fighting a conventional war of attrition with the Russians that isn't going to go nuclear, you would still need at least a million, at least bare minimum 1 million troops. Ukraine has they had all told, probably about 1 million troops. So I don't know how many they have now. There's all kinds of exaggerated statistics, but nonetheless, they still have the biggest standing army in Europe and the most experienced. So these armies that are being amassed and talked about in Europe are for the purpose of policing the wasteland, I do believe, and just ensuring some continuity of government post-SHTF when the nuclear dust settles. Robert Kiyosaki, we're going to try to get him on the channel. I agree with some of the things he says and don't agree with others, but as predicted in my book, Rich Dad's Prophecy, 2013, the biggest crash in history is coming. Well, 12 years on, and we're still waiting, but I agree with him. The S&P 500 is overvalued on every possible metric in the system. It's overvalued. And so, of course, we're at the top. I'm afraid that crash time is now through this summer. Unfortunately, millions, especially my generation of boomers, will be wiped out when the stock and bond markets crash. So, it's a good book. Rich Dad, Poor Dad is an excellent book. I would encourage people to check it out. You know what I think about, I posted this comment today about money and wealth, and what I've discovered is that the people on top have more in common with the people on the bottom. And what I mean by that is, I've been on the bottom. I've been on the absolute abject bottom rung of the socioeconomic ladder. And I've also been not at the top, but, in the top 10%, right? And maybe even slightly higher. And I can tell you one piece of wisdom, and that's that you never want to envy the people who have everything, because you need to understand that every day those people, put yourself in their shoes for a second, you can have anything you want, right? And when you reach that level that it's never going to get any better. Like that this is as good as it's going to get. And that's why a lot of people go crazy at that level, because they have some kind of existential crisis where they try to keep them happy with hedonism. And that's why a lot of people get into some weird culty shit. You have to ask yourself, well, why are these multi-billionaires who could have anything they want, why are they dressing up in these weird costumes and doing these rituals and shit? It's because you get to that level and it's like, what else is there to do, right? So don't envy these people. I always quote Isaac Brock from Modest Mouse. He says, they got the land, but we got the view. Okay, it's the journey, not the destination, and other cliches like that. Anyways, back to the video. Okay, where are we going here? Okay, this is... That face says it all. It's coming. Get ready. Donald Trump is not allowing states, this is in the big beautiful bill, artificial intelligence and information technology modernization. They are prohibiting the restriction of any regulation over AI for 10 years on a state level because they want to modernize all this stuff. So they're talking about, bringing in Palantir, and they're going to bring in a social credit. Look, all the shit, the most dystopian shit, is being sold to the right now. I'm just going to say it. Elon Musk is, maybe not as an individual, maybe unknowingly, is, if I was like a Christian fundamentalist, I would probably view him as the Antichrist. Because every single thing that, Christians have feared for the longest time from a mark of the beast point of view, he's bringing it all in. From brain chips to making driving illegal to no steering wheel in the car, monitoring your thoughts, monitoring you from anywhere on the grid using Starlink. And now they're going to put cameras on that shit as well, so you have a real-time 24/7 feed of everything going on the planet at any given time. You guys think I'm crazy? That's coming in a few years. Okay, and Starlink is likely going to be the delivery platform. Most dystopian shit is being brought in by the guy who many people think is the hero. I seen this shit coming years ago. Before it was cool to talk about red pill, blue pill. Man, I've been around the circuit for a long time. I've been on the internet doing this shit since, the loose change era. Back in, what was that? When was the 9/11 truth movement? That was back in the early days of the 2000s. Now that stuff's like, people are just realizing it. There's a third building that went down. Yeah, old news. Anyways, Sam Altman, let's hear what Mr. Altman has to say. Remember, this guy had a case thrown at him by his sister, and everybody forgot about that. Because he's working on the $500 billion Stargate project, which integrates the nuclear systems with Skynet and the military. Here we go.
The whole world get a sense of what's happening. Many people in the field have advocated that this should be developed more in secret. And there are reasons for that. I don't want to totally dismiss it from a safety perspective. But this is going to be such a massive change to so many aspects of society that we need the world as a whole, as many people as we can, to understand this, to weigh in on it, for people and institutions to have time to think about this, to understand it, to really feel it, and gradually update and decide how we all want to move forward. What a global regulatory framework should be like, what the social norms are going to be, how we want to use this. And I think there are going to be scary times ahead, and there's going to be a lot of transition. I'm very confident this can be managed. I think the more we can all do it together, the more.
Okay, guys, I've been following this AI story since the days of Hugo de Garis, Ben Goertzel, Transcendent Man, Ray Kurzweil, back in the 2000s. And the way they're talking about this, like it's a foregone conclusion at this point. And the way they're just talking about it so ominously is absolutely terrifying when you think this guy is a prepper. All these guys are building bunkers, not because they think the hunter-killer Terminators are going to come for them, but they know that this is going to be leveraged in war. And I think there was this video, I believe it was put out by Johnny, what the hell is his name? He's a big YouTuber. And he was showing this war game thing and it was focused around China and Taiwan, and it's this big map. And I didn't really watch it that much because I find those videos to be a little bit hokey. I kind of got the gist of it. I looked at it for 5 seconds. Okay, I get the point. This game you play and you war game stuff, and you have your tanks, your various naval vessels, your air power, and all this stuff, and you put it on a big board that you walk around, and it's like a game of Risk. Okay, now take the person out of the equation. Chess. When did the computer first beat the chess master? Was it late 90s? AlphaGo, late 2000s, early 2000 teens. It's only a matter of time before they wire a general up to that thing, and they're going to put it in charge, and they're going to let that thing command the battlefield because it's going to be able to do it more efficiently. And so these guys are up to something. Like, every single person who talks about this, and they do it in such a facetious sort of way where they're talking about the potential either end of the world or AI going rogue and killing us, or they're talking about this huge transition into a digital economy and everybody losing their jobs. And just the way they do it, it's like something doesn't sit right with me about all of this. Now, what might happen with respect to automation, a lot of people are fearing automation. Here's what I think is going to happen. You know how NFTs there was a big boost in popularity throughout the pandemic. People were buying pictures for like $30 million, and then it all fizzled out. NFTs are going to get a return. You see, NFTs are virtual real estate. What they're going to do in the future, probably not too long from now, you're going to be able to buy virtual real estate, and people are going to likely have jobs in the virtual world. And there's going to be some kind of system in the virtual world where you have to, if you want to use it, you have to prove that you're a human. So you'll be able to know, and there'll be some like universally agreed upon thing where you can prove that you're talking to a human being. And people will work in the virtual world, doing whatever, who knows what, selling virtual real estate. I don't know, okay? It's going to be just entertainment, hedonism, lots of health problems, lots of psychiatric medications, lots of shitty, big agra, pesticide-laden foods. And that's going to, in our pods, right? In our very small, tiny home pod that YouTube is doing its best to help popularize how fun it is to live in a cardboard box. That's the future, okay? So, yeah. That's what's coming. Oh, and then there's this. There's the environmental stuff. Again, I'm an empiricist. I'm a realist. It's getting hotter. That's scientifically proven. It's getting hotter, especially in the north. The further you go north, the more disproportionately hotter it's getting. In the Arctic, it's like 4 degrees Celsius above average, which is around 7 degrees Fahrenheit. When you go lower to the equator, it's closer to 1 degree or 1.5 degrees. There's an invasive species in Canada called the pine beetle, and it has been decimating. Decimating isn't the right word. I think we're beyond decimation at this point. It has been destroying the pine trees throughout the boreal forest for probably, 20 years or so, if not more. And so that has left a lot of standing dead timber. In addition to that, you do have a lot more population living more proximate to the fault lines. And as a result of these three things, and the fact that it's drier as a result of the warmer weather, even though, yes, there are periods where we receive more rainfall than average, but to replenish the aquifers, to replenish the water table to the extent it was at, would take years and years. Like where I live, I can look on Google Earth and you can see ponds, you can see swamps, okay? And Google Earth will let you go back. In some respects, I think the earliest I can go is somewhere in the 2000s, and it wasn't actually Google Earth that was doing it, but they bought footage from other sources that did this, and the resolution is shit, but you can still see. And now it's bone dry. We got a lot of water in ground. We've got a ways to go before we become a desert because we have a lot of water in the ground. It's a relatively high water table, but it is drying up. Okay, so even if we get a watershed year, no pun intended, where we get a lot of, La Nina rain and cooler weather, it doesn't make up for the fact that on the whole, shit is getting hotter and the fucking forests are burning. And look at the size of this. Look at the size of this, man. It's bigger than Prince Albert National Park. It's insane. And the winds have been not quite on the level of California, but this is a much bigger region. And you can just see like the winds, like the jet stream is blowing all this smoke, and it is going all the way down to the States. So you're going to get it all the way down to the States. And let's see if we got a Zoom Earth view here. So this is Zoom Earth. This gives you a satellite image. Unfortunately, the clouds kind of get in the way. On a clear day, you can see, and there's no precipitation in these clouds, unfortunately. But you can tell the difference between the smoke. So that hazy, that's smoke, all the way down to Chicago, St. Louis. And in fact, in a lot of cases, that smoke is thicker down there. Let me see if I can get you a visual of these fires that are burning here. For some reason on this one, I guess it's difficult for the satellite imagery to parse out the difference between the clouds and the smoke. Let me see if I can... Okay, you kind of seen it there. Let's just go back in time a bit here. Okay, so there you can see these are these fires right here. So those are these fires right here. So these are the Candle Lake fires. Candle Lake is this lake right here, which you probably can't see, but these are big ass lakes. I mean, this is a huge area. For perspective, let me see if we got some perspective. It's damn near the size of Nova Scotia or Vancouver Island. Quickly, maybe like half of Vancouver Island, but if you factor in all of these, so up to Manitoba, these are far and away the biggest fires. All of this smoke, I mean, for perspective, I'm right here. The fire's right here. We're not even getting any smoke from this fire. We're getting smoke from Alberta's fire because it's coming through. So all it's going to take is a wind change that's coming that way, and we're going to be experiencing what we did the other day. Not looking good. Not looking good. On that note, if you want to support the channel, the best way to do that, CanadianPreparedness.com. That's where you can gear up. I'm telling you guys, man, time is running out. And look, people say, you're a fearmonger, blah, blah, blah. If it's not obvious by now, man, I don't even care. Just go to Walmart if you have to. Go to Costco. Go to Value Village. go anywhere to get the shit that you're going to need to ride it out and do some training. Just go camping over the weekend. See if you could tough it without the amenities of modern civilization. Because it's not until you really test the gear that you're going to be able to really understand what you need. That's where the coureurs de bois, the French voyageurs, they would, before they embarked on a 1-year journey across Canada, they would spend the weekend out in the sticks. They would paddle out maybe a few miles, and they would figure out what they needed, because even a seasoned expert when it comes to wilderness survival is going to forget something. So I'm not saying run out into the woods, by the way. I'm just saying that that's probably going to be the only option for a lot of people if the worst happens, which is why I would strongly encourage people to, I'm going to do a dedicated video about this, where you can go if you have no place to go, because it might come down to that. There's a lot of places to go. In Canada, there's a lot of places to go, but you got to have some cash. Because you're not just going to be able to rough it in the sticks like a wilderness wild man. To grow food at scale, to do animal husbandry, to get all of the bare necessities covered, you're going to need a shipping container probably full of shit. But that is achievable more so than going and building an off-grid homestead or buying an acreage or getting, there's ways that you can position yourself in such a way to have a contingency plan, which doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. It can also double as a recreational exercise and just, a way to get out of the rat race for a little bit. Anyways, I'm rambling on. This video is way too damn long. Thanks for watching.